podcast host, founder and leader of Proverbs 31 Ministries, cancer survivor, and mother to 5 and grandmother to 3. By the way, I didn't know you were a grandmother to 3. Congratulations. That's so fun.
I know. It's the most fun thing. If I would have had my grandkids first, I probably would have had a lot more because they're so amazing. They can do no wrong, you know.
That's what everybody says. I cannot wait for that grandparent reward and that grandparent energy. I love that you have that.
Yeah. And then if they start to be naughty, you can send them back home, which is also a real treat.
I have 3 sons and we are not in that stage right now. So I can't wait. One day I'll be living the dream like you. But Lisa, thanks so much for being here with us today. We're here to talk about your latest book, Good Boundaries and Goodbyes, Loving Others Without Losing the Best of Who You Are, which comes out November 8th. I know you've been on the show with us before, episode 38 and 168, so we'll be sure to put those in the notes. But obviously some things have changed for you over the past several years that led to you writing this book. So if you don't mind, can you sort of reintroduce yourself, tell us where you are now, and how you started writing about boundaries after the last few years you've been through?
Absolutely. Well, I think for the people who have read some of my previous books or even follow along with me through social media or some of my other ministry avenues, you would already know the past 8 years of my life have been the hardest that I have ever walked through. It's been a devastating season that I didn't see coming and I never expected to have to face. So there were many ups and downs. There were times where there was great hope. There was times of reconciliation, and then there was times of more devastation. And it was just a cycle of hurt and hope and more hurt, and then trying to hope again. And in the end, I experienced the death of my marriage. And that's what I really call it, the death of my marriage, not just divorce, because it was the deepest grief I have ever known.
Wow.
And so I needed to really not only take a look at what had happened, but I needed to take a look at myself.
Yeah.
And I needed to be honest enough with what did I contribute in this situation. And that was really hard because the choices that led to the marriage being unbiblical and unsustainable, they weren't my choices.
Yeah.
But still, I had to be brave enough to sit in the silence of what is now and recognize I want to take enough time to be whole and healed and healthy. And to do that, I have to look at what I could work on now, being a single person.
Wow.
And one of the things that really emerged quickly is that I had struggled with codependency. And which is at first was so hard for me to say because I would tell you that I'm a strong, independent woman.
Yeah, right.
But my counselor made me feel better. He said, Lisa, if anybody has a belly button, they have a little bit of codependency. So, okay.
Okay. This is all right for me to be struggling with this.
Yes. He helped me see that a good definition of codependency is when you catch yourself in a cycle of, I need you to be okay so I can be okay. So are you okay? Because if you're not okay, then I'm not okay. So can you please be okay? Okay.
Wow.
And so when I heard him do that, I found myself there. And, sometimes when people have lived in close proximity with another person struggling with addictions, it's pretty common to get caught in that.
Yeah.
And so I recognized that part of the reason that I was so long suffering in my marriage, part of the reason that I stayed and pursued reconciliation so much, there was some high and holy and noble pursuit in that.
Sure.
But there was also some unhealthy dysfunction in that as well. And I needed to tend to that with my own choices and my own tendencies.
Wow.
So, Yeah, I realize I need to work on boundaries because I actually stink at boundaries. So I write from my point of struggle, and this was the next struggle that I really wanted to tackle.
Hearing you say that, I mean, I'm thinking of like on my own journey, but friend after friend after friend, conversation after conversation after conversation I've had. And I would say this is not just a female issue, but I'm thinking of the women I've talked to who feel like, I don't know if I can set healthy boundaries. I don't know if I can say no. I don't know if I can take up space. I don't know if I can have my own agency because that's quote unquote unbiblical, right? You're supposed to lay down your life. You're supposed to. And so I think we've gotten this sort of biblical sacrificial humility really mixed up with what you're talking about, codependency. How did you even begin to go, no, this is what health looks like, and God actually affirms this versus, I guess untangle that for all the women, Lisa.
Yes, well, I think what you're really saying is we have a lack of biblical confidence around boundaries. So,
yes,
first thing I'll say is we must not confuse the good command to love with the bad realities of enabling behavior we should never tolerate.
Wow.
And love should be what draws us together, not what tears us apart. And God's definition of love is pretty clear about that we need to be seeking each other's highest good.
Wow.
So when we look at biblical confidence around boundaries, I started in Genesis 1, and I was shocked to discover God created the foundations of this entire world using boundaries.
Amen.
He said, here's the light, and where the light ends, now the darkness begins. So he separated darkness from light. Yeah. He separated the sky from the sea. He separated the sea from the land. He told the sea, the waters, you can only go this far and not no further, because now it's your dry land. So those healthy separations are boundaries.
Wow.
And separating this from another. And so when I got into Genesis 2, and I realized the first recorded conversation between God and man was around the topic of a boundary.
Wow.
All the subjects that God could have chosen for this first recorded conversation between God and man. And he chose to establish a boundary.
Wow.
I think that's fascinating.
Yeah.
And how God did it was he didn't do it for the sake of overly restricting and constricting this relationship. No. God established the boundary by saying, you are free to eat from any tree in the garden. So he did it in the context of freedom, because when we know where the boundary lines are, we have true freedom then. And we're not having to always second guess, is this okay? Is this okay? We clearly establish this is what is acceptable and this is what is not acceptable.
Yeah.
This is what I will tolerate and this is what I will not tolerate. And then after God says you are free to eat from any tree in the garden, now here comes the boundary. But you must not eat from the tree that is in the middle of the garden, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, or else you will die. So God wasn't being overly restrictive. He was doing it so that he could be protective over Adam and protect that relationship from sin tainting it. And so I think that boundaries are not just a good idea, they're actually God's idea.
Wow.
And isn't it fascinating that where in the garden we have one boundary that God establishes, as sin starts to enter the picture, and where there's sin, there's chaos, and where there's chaos, there's a lack of a boundary and a need for another boundary. By the time we get to the law and the prophets in the Bible, there's over 600 boundaries
that
have been established.
Right.
Because there was additional sin, there was additional chaos, therefore there was a need for additional boundaries. So we see it all throughout the Bible. Boundaries are not just a good idea, they're God's idea. And even Jesus demonstrated the practice of setting healthy boundaries.
Wow. That's such a great way to reframe boundaries. I think empower us to understand like this is a biblical thing. You're not saying something that's anti-God. This was God's idea. And therefore it's healthy and life-giving and out of love and freedom. I love that. It's like placed in our identity in who we are in God. So good, Lisa.
That's right. And by the time we get to the establishment of the temple, that of course the mobile version of that was the tabernacle. But by the time we get to the tabernacle and the temple, God did something that I think is completely fascinating. And this is the lesson I learned the most biblical confidence around boundaries from. When God established the temple, he allowed certain people access to certain parts of the temple, but not all people, all access to every part of the temple.
Right.
It wasn't because this group of people was more valuable than this group of people. It's because this group of people were required a higher level of responsibility.
Wow.
So the more responsibility that was required of you, the more access you were granted. And by the time we get to the Holy of Holies inside the temple, there was only one person, the high priest, who once a year could enter the Holy of Holies.
Yeah.
And it was to make atonement for the people. But he also had to demonstrate the highest level of responsibility for that high level of access. He had to be perfectly cleansed and purified, or else he would drop dead in the presence of holiness, right? And so those two words, access and responsibility, were very crucial for me to pay attention to. And here's where I think we can have a more logical consideration of boundaries rather than making it so attached to all the emotion that can happen around boundaries. And this is what I want you to remember and take away. To the level that we give someone access to us, and that could be financially, physically, sexually, relationally, emotionally, to the level that we permit someone access to us, they must bring that same level of responsibility so they can demonstrate that they are responsible with the access that we've granted them. If we grant someone level 10 access, but they are only willing or capable of level 3 responsibility, we can have a conversation and ask them to bring more responsibility.
Wow.
But if they are unwilling or incapable of anything above a level 3 responsibility, the mistake that I've made is I've tried to put a boundary on them to control them or to force them to change. But we all know using external pressure to force someone to change may result in temporary behavior modification, but not lasting result.
Right.
So if they're only willing or capable of demonstrating level 3 responsibility and they are not willing to change, then we must not put a boundary on them. We must put a boundary in that situation on ourselves by reducing the access that we grant them down to the demonstrated level of responsibility that they're bringing.
Ooh, this is such powerful stuff, Lisa. I can tell you've worked really hard on it, but I mean, this is like mind blowing because I even think just to say I have enough agency and enough dignity to say, wait, no, there is a level 10 access to me, and not everybody gets that. And that's because God has like called me his daughter and I'm worthy. I think even getting there is so, so powerful. Oh, thank you for sharing.
And it's not just our right to have a voice and to be able to communicate this. It's our responsibility. Because we are not called to control other people, but we are called to remain self-controlled.
So good.
And boundaries are a way for us to remain self-controlled, sane, and safe.
Wow. So good, Lisa. I know you said a lot of this is born out of like the most pain you have ever walked through. And I'm thinking of all of our listeners are people who are walking through deep, deep pain and suffering, sorrow, loss, tragedy. How has this beginning to understand boundaries where you weren't setting them? How has this begun to bring healing and wholeness, back to your soul?
Well, I think I finally realized that it is not just good, but it is necessary for us to communicate inside of our relationships what we do have to give and what we don't have to give, what is acceptable and what's not acceptable, what we will tolerate and what we will not tolerate. And of course, always allowing the Holy Spirit to speak to us about that so that we're growing and maturing and all of that. But I think for so long, I got caught in this situation of thinking, I can't take any more of this, but I'm powerless to change it. So I felt so stuck just so absolutely crippled in the harsh dynamics of a relationship that, it had not just become difficult, it had become destructive.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
I almost died several times in this whole process. And, the body is going to tell the story of the emotional trauma that we've experienced, because trauma is not just something that comes at you, it's something that happens in you.
Yeah.
And I think understanding that boundaries are a good way to fight for the relationship, so we don't have to spend so much time fighting against the unhealthy patterns, the dysfunctions in a relationship.
Yeah.
And I think that's just been crucial. And really, if you think about it, boundaries are a way to communicate how this relationship can be healthy. And I'm careful not to say expectations, because expectations have this sense of simmering resentments, like you better do this or else, right?
Right.
But instead, I've learned it's good to bring, this is what I need, and this is what I desire. And using boundaries, not let those desires turn into demands, but rather giving the other person the freedom to say, okay, here's a need that I have, and here's a need you have, and let's talk about this and draw some boundaries so that we can be respectful to seek each other's highest good.
Love that. Oh, it's so beautiful. You just said something I thought was so profound, that at some point you realized your relationship was no longer difficult, but destructive. I might have misquoted that, but something like that. For our listeners who may be asking themselves that question, like, has this moved beyond something that's simply difficult, but this is destructive, this is dangerous? How do you begin to know? What are some of the signs?
Well, I wish I had a formula that we could plug in,
That would be nice, wouldn't it?
Relationships are so nuanced. There's so many factors that I just didn't think it was appropriate to give someone A, B, and C. If these things are present, then it's destructive.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not going to tell you what to think in this book, but I will give you a lot to think about. And so there are lists of self-reflection considerations that I think we need to pay attention to.
Yeah.
One of those is, where am I minimizing the best of who I am to cover up for the worst of who someone else is? Oh. Where am I refusing to acknowledge how harsh things really are behind closed doors? Where am I allowing unbiblical behaviors to continue because I am so afraid of what that other person might do if I try to draw a healthy boundary? Wow. An unhealthy person has never met a boundary that they like. Healthy people respect healthy boundaries.
Yeah, that's good.
And so I think it's important for us to go through, and in my book, Good Boundaries and Goodbyes, I have lists of these things to consider.
Okay.
And I think it's important to consider those things for ourselves, but also recognize that we shouldn't go at this alone. We need to have other people with wise counsel speaking into our life. But here's the absolute necessity. We have to commit to telling the full story of what's really happening to those few trusted advisors. Maybe that's your counselor. Yeah. Maybe that's a really wise mentor. Maybe that's a very trusted and wise friend. Yeah. Maybe it's even, like your women's ministry leader at church or your Bible study leader. But it is crucial that they want to know the full truth and that you're willing to give the full truth and that they have enough training to recognize and to help you recognize where the behaviors have gotten unsafe, unsustainable, or where there's an absolute lack of trust. Yeah. Trust is the oxygen of all human relationships. Where there's no trust, the relationship will not survive.
Yeah. Wow. I know some of this you probably do cover in the book. Again, the title is Good Boundaries and Goodbyes, Loving Others Without Losing the Best of Who You Are. For somebody listening who's like, Lisa, okay, I I want to set some boundaries. I need to set some boundaries. How do I start? Like, how do I even recognize what's a good boundary? And and then you have to say it, right? Like, you have to have a conversation. You have to set the boundary, not just assume the other person knows. What are some practical tips that you would offer if you could?
Okay. So this doesn't always have to be hard and horrific. Now, some boundary conversations are going to be really challenging. And again, in my book, Good Boundaries and Goodbyes, I spent a lot of time giving people scripts because sometimes communicating a boundary is the hardest step.
Yeah.
And so I really took the time to think through some healthy ways to have healthy boundary conversations. But here's a couple of simple scripts. One is consider your capacity and consider that you cannot afford to go bankrupt in any capacity of your life. For example, we already know that we should not give full access to everyone to our bank account. Why? Because we have limited resources.
Right.
And because it's not because we're unkind or uncruel, it's because we're limited and we need to be responsible and be a faithful steward of what's been entrusted to us.
Yeah.
We need to be able to pay our bills and all of that. And if we give unlimited access to people who we don't know are going to be responsible with that access, then we run the risk of becoming bankrupt. We know this with our finances.
Right.
We forget it with so many other areas of our life.
So true.
And a logical way to think of it is, what is my capacity? What is my capacity? I'm not unlimited. I am limited in my capacity. So let's say someone asks you to please head up the volunteer committee at your child's school this year. That's a wonderful thing to do.
Yeah.
And that is a perfect assignment to someone who has the capacity to do that. And when you look at your capacity, though, it's not realistic. So if someone asks you to do that and it's not realistic, then you can simply say, Dear Sally, or whoever this person is, Dear Sally, in an email, Dear Sally, I so appreciate having the opportunity to serve at my child's school. And this opportunity, when I first heard of it, my heart went, yes, yes, yes. But the reality of my time makes this a no. I cannot give that. Now, here's what I can give. And I do have the capacity for.
Yeah.
Thank you for understanding. And so you see, that's not a terrible, awful thing.
No, that's even kind. I mean, that's even like polite and sweet.
Yes. And at the same time, it's establishing that you will be respectful of your own limits.
Yeah, I love that.
And that's not just for you, but it's for the sake of the best of who you are, not becoming so frazzled and fractured and freaking out because you've overextended yourself, that now people are getting the worst version of you because you're just running on fumes.
Right.
So that's why I chose the subtitle of Good Boundaries and Goodbyes.
Yeah.
Loving others well without losing the best of who you are.
Yeah.
We want to keep the best of who we are front and centered. So we have to acknowledge our capacity and draw boundaries around what we can and cannot give, what we will and will not tolerate.
Oh, that's so good. I have a million more questions for you. I want to honor your time though, Lisa. I'm even just thinking of, how do women begin to know, even men, how do we all begin to know what is the best version of ourselves? How do we know what boundaries? I'm sure you unpack a lot of this in your book, so I'm so excited to read it. But let me ask you one more boundaries question, if you don't mind. I think sometimes the unhealthy version of of boundaries is that people will use them when they're not necessary. Like they don't want to dive into something that's hard or scary. And so they'll just say, I'm just going to set a boundary there. How do you discern before the Lord, before your community in this relationship, when is boundary time and when it's actually time to kind of lean in and do the difficult thing?
Such a good question. And I really think that individually we have to ask the Lord to always give us the discernment. And so, but here's something really important. Am I using this boundary to skirt some kind of responsibility that really is my responsibility? Because if I'm using this boundary and skirting a responsibility, or even just skirting consideration for my fellow people, then that's not appropriate. You know, like, for example, at the holidays, if someone says, I'm setting a boundary, I'm not helping do any of the dishes this year because after I eat, I'm just too exhausted.
Yeah.
Well, that's extremely inconsiderate. And actually, it's you demonstrating a lack of responsibility. And so that's not an appropriate boundary.
Yeah.
An appropriate boundary would be something more along the lines of, hey, why don't we put everybody's name in a hat and then list out things that need to be accomplished today and allow everyone to either draw out their name and attach it to a responsibility or have them sign up to be responsible so that the workload is demonstrated or
divvied up. Yeah.
Divvied up across the board in a fair way. And maybe the reason that person was saying, I will not help with dishes is because maybe last year they got stuck doing everything.
Yeah.
And other people weren't pulling their load, right?
Yeah.
And so a better boundary thing is, hey, this year, everybody is going to have an opportunity to help so that everybody can have the full enjoyment and the full responsibility of all the enjoyment that we're going to have. And so a boundary would be giving each people a responsibility and giving them an opportunity to meet that responsibility so that all of the weight doesn't fall on that one person.
So I love that. What a healthy practical way to think about boundaries. Lisa, you are one of our favorite people. We love that you just, you're so vulnerable and so real from your pain, and that's where our audience is. And so it means so much just that you'd spend some time with us today. Where can our listeners connect with you? Where can they buy the book, pre-order the book, and connect with all things Proverbs 31 and Lisa TerKeurst?
Absolutely. Well, the book is available anywhere books are sold. If you order it through Proverbs 31 Ministries, you will actually get some bonus material in a limited number of copies that we did it's just for a special version for people who order from Proverbs 31.
Cool.
So you can find that at proverbs31.org, or again, you can buy the regular version of the book anywhere books are sold. You can connect with me on social media at Lisa TerKeurst, and I'd love to meet you there.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Thanks for being here with us today.
Oh, it was such a joy. I absolutely treasured our time.